Hello everyone, friends. Today I'd like to talk about what I would do if I wanted to start investing in overseas real estate right now. In general, what are the nuances, the main questions, what should you pay attention to, and overall I want to cover this topic in detail because this is a question that almost every client asks when they come to us, especially those who are facing the need to buy overseas real estate for the first time. First and foremost, whenever an investor comes to us, regardless of their budget, our main task is to understand the client's primary need. Everyone's investment goals are different. Some people want to invest, and probably most of us want to invest, and then get a twofold return in just a month. But first and foremost, it's important to have a realistic understanding of the market and to analyze it as a whole, relying on historical cases and current examples to see how much you can actually earn. So when clients come to us and say, I want to invest, let's say, $1 million, we always ask how long they want to invest that money for. In other words, over what time frame should we build your investment portfolio? Why do we ask this? Because, for example, if a client wants a short-term return, that's a completely different strategy. This often means finding a property that is currently being sold below market value for some reason, trying to close that deal, and then, for example, selling the project in 3 to 6 months at its market price. There are such cases, they do happen, they're less common, but we often encounter exactly this kind of need. But if a client comes to us with a more, let's say, long-term investment plan, for example, says, well, I'm not planning to cash out yet, I'm interested in having my money work for me, say that same $1 million. Then in this case, we have a broader field for action, a wider range of opportunities. And here again, there are different strategies involved. There is a strategy of buying a property with the aim of reselling it later. And there is a strategy of buying a property with the intention of renting it out, using it, or even partial personal use. And accordingly, some properties are suitable for both strategies. Some properties are specifically suited for a particular purpose, for example, for renting out. Now, I'll explain why a particular property is suited for one purpose or another. For example, if a client comes to me and says, I want to buy a property for short-term rental and I also want to be able to come and stay there myself, I always, for instance, use Dubai or the UAE as an example and say that in this case, properties on the first coastline or in locations that are in high demand among tourists are more suitable here. Because who mainly rents short-term here? It's tourists. And a tourist won't go to the remote areas of Dubai, whether it's GVC, GVT, but will always prefer locations that are closer to the sea, closer to shopping centers and so on. And accordingly, properties in these locations are the right fit here. So we select properties in locations that are suitable for short-term rentals. If, on the other hand, a client comes to us with the goal of renting out long-term, then again, the locations will be different. These will be locations that expats consider for themselves. That is, these are often more remote areas because people frequently rent there for a year, live there and commute to work. And accordingly, there we can put together a portfolio of properties that are better suited for long-term rentals. That's what concerns the rental strategy specifically. Next, if we want to talk specifically about the resale strategy, which in English we call flipping, here the field of activity is broader. Again, we don't rule out that a property which is ideal, perfectly suited for resale, could also be suitable for renting out. Often these are overlapping strategies. But, for example, certain locations are often suitable for resale. So what should you pay attention to? These are locations that are just beginning to develop. Why? Because in such places, the pricing is always set by the developer themselves. For example, if a new location has just launched, the developer sets the prices there. Often the developer has a master plan for this location where they're not just building 18, 20, 30 or 40 houses. And accordingly, with each new house, the developer raises the prices, basing this decision on, for example, the fact that demand for their first, second or third house was very high. And now, with the best developers in the UAE, their properties are generally sold out in just one day. Sometimes it can even happen in just a few hours. So if you're lucky and your broker helps you acquire such a property, you're already winning from the very start, because even if you resell it in a year and a half or two, you'll already be able to lock in your income, your profit, and accordingly reinvest in some new property. Properties that you can buy on the secondary market, for example, are also often suitable for resale. So what do we mean by secondary market? Even if, for example, Ivan Ivanovic bought an apartment from a developer in 2023, paid for it for 2 years, and for some reason now can't continue making payments. Often Ivan Ivanovic may be willing to sell this property for the same price he bought it for 2 years ago. Or the price might be a bit higher, but still below market value. So if you buy such a property, it's also great for further resale. And essentially, you also make a profit simply by acquiring the property. Also, specifically for flipping, for resale strategies, we often offer our clients the option to purchase wholesale lots. For example, this could mean buying an entire floor or half a floor, because many developers, if you buy in bulk, also offer certain discounts at the entry point. This could be, say, 2 to 4%. But as you probably know, or if you don't, I'll explain. In general, all properties in Dubai are sold with installment plans. An installment plan means you usually need to pay about 20% upfront. After that, you pay according to the payment schedule. For example, let's say we take a 60-40 payment plan. That means you need to pay 60% before receiving the keys, and the remaining 40% is paid when you get the keys. Even if the developer offers a discount on a wholesale lot, say 2%, and we choose a strategy to resell the property after 50% of the payment is made, you already gain 4% compared to all the properties bought at retail. That's your net profit, which generally varies at each stage of the property's completion. And in this particular way, you already have a clear advantage over most retail lots. If we're talking about a regular retail purchase, then it's absolutely essential to pay close attention to buying a property that fits exactly the strategy you've chosen. So if we're talking about renting out, if we're talking about investing for rental purposes, then these should be properties that aren't on the lower floors, properties that don't have the worst views, and properties that are attractive to tenants. Alternatively, if the property doesn't have a good view or isn't on a high floor, its price should be reasonably lower compared to a more expensive property. If we're talking, for example, about a resale strategy, often clients come in, let's say, for instance, with a 40-story building. They tell me, I want an apartment on the 40th floor. From an investment perspective, that's not the best choice, because apartments on the 40th floor will naturally be the most expensive, and they're more suitable for end users, those who are buying for themselves to live in or to rent out with a beautiful view. For resale, we always recommend a middle or slightly above middle floor, because those sell well. In a number of developments, for example, when several investors are already looking to resell the property, let's say, for instance, we have 30 listings on our website. If we buy the top floor, our listing will probably be one of the most expensive, because we'll have paid more for the property than, say, those who bought on the middle floors. Well, by middle floors, we mean exactly the middle or sometimes the lower floors, and accordingly, to be attractive, to stay competitive in the market, and to avoid difficulties with selling or further transactions, the smart choice is to pick a property on those middle floors because they are easier to sell. I think if we're talking specifically about these strategies like resale or rental, well, overall, I've covered everything in the big picture. If we talk in general about any pitfalls, specifically regarding investments, basically in foreign real estate, if we don't just talk about the UAE, but about the world as a whole, because we often have clients coming to us, So, for example, I compare Dubai with Bali, I compare Dubai with Thailand, I compare Dubai with Europe, with Spain. It's probably also worth drawing your attention specifically to the laws of the country. For example, if we're talking about the UAE, there's no taxation when buying, selling, or renting out properties. You get full ownership of the property, and there are absolutely no risks. Whereas, for example, if we compare it with Spain, there you might have these gypsies who move into your property and you won't be able to evict them. Or, for instance, if we compare it to Bali, there the land isn't owned outright, it's allocated for construction only for a certain period. But if, for example, the developer doesn't comply with the land's designated use or something else goes wrong, then the properties can simply be seized and investors are left with nothing and can't do anything with them. So it's always important to pay close attention to the country's laws and to look more deeply into the history of taxation in that country, the history of the possibility of reselling the property in the future, the possibility of renting it out, and how the property will be operated and maintained, and overall to the safety of your investment. Whenever, a client comes to me and asks what they should pay attention to, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. Let's put it in simple terms. For each of us, the primary need is, for example, to eat and drink, and then the next level is safety. For every investor, and probably for each of us, safety is important. We probably wouldn't buy a property that promises us the world if we're worried that tomorrow it might be taken away from us and we could lose it. That's why I always stick to the idea that, yes, safety is the top priority for our investments. Next, what matters to us is the profitability of our investments, so that we clearly understand that this income won't be taxed, that we won't lose part of it when selling the property or when transferring money out of the country, or, for example, not being able to transfer money out of the country at all, which is something that's happening now in Europe for our Russian-speaking community. And then, of course, you can also pay attention to things like the prestige of a particular location. That is, of course, also important. Sometimes a client will say, I want to buy a property that will be attractive for investment, but I need it to be the most luxurious. In such cases, we don't always offer the most luxurious option, because what looks the shiniest is far from always the easiest to sell. Sometimes for investment purposes, it might be better to buy 10 studios rather than a penthouse, which could be very difficult to sell later. So it's absolutely essential to pay attention to the dynamics and specifics of the market in the country or city where you're investing. well, I guess that's basically it. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you for watching this video.